This has got a little bit of a different video for me. It often comes up. People often say, why do you collect antiques? It seems to be sort of, to me, an odd question to be asked, but why, well, what's your interest? How did that get started? And I think like many of you, my interest in art and antiques started in my childhood because I was taught to be interested in history. And very, very early on, I think I was in the third or fourth grade. I remember a history teacher actually said something that stuck with me because I had never heard of what an artichoke was at the time. But she said, American history and global history are like thousands and thousands of little artichokes because there are so many aspects to history within the world. And an artichoke, you only see what's currently there, where it is in the present. But to know where it came from, you need to peel back the leaves and look inside. And the deeper you get, the better the artichoke is. And of course, that day I went out and looked up to find out what the heck an artichoke was. But her point was that is what history is. History is what we see today is the culmination of human history. What we drive, what we eat, how we travel, what we wear, what we have in our homes, all of our material culture is the result of the evolution of human history. All right. And some of it is good, some of it is not good because we're human and we do make mistakes. But from a very early stage, I was encouraged very openly by my family and by my schools to want to learn about history and to see it, to live history, because I lived in a very historic place. I grew up in maybe the most historic state in the United States, which is Massachusetts. And my family has lived here for a very long time. We came over in the 1660s during the reign of Charles II and settled here as farmers. And that was only 40 years or so after the Pilgrims came in 1620. And starting at a very young age, at around the third grade, we were taught and shown our history in our town because we had lots of historic sites to see in the town. Because I was raised in the town of Marblehead, Massachusetts, and it was founded in 1629, just a couple of years, I think 3 years after the town of Salem was settled, and that was only 8 or 9 years after the Pilgrims came. And as a kid, we toured the homes of historic figures. We learned about all the naval history in the town of Marblehead, which is quite extraordinary, and the important political figures that came from the town, inventors that came from the town, playwrights, performers, all kinds of things happened in that little town. And Marblehead played a huge pivotal role in the American history as from the Revolution goes. As far as the Revolution, it was a very successful early colony due to fishing. It was settled by English fishermen that came over, and they had we had 3 harbors, which made it ideal for fishing, and it stuck out into the ocean a good bit, so getting out to sea was easy. And they had lots of major players in the Revolutionary War. We had the first American naval ship that was pushed into service to fight the British, was called the Hannah. And it belonged to a man in Marblehead named John Glover, who became a general in the Revolution. And he put his ship up and loaded it with weapons to attack British ships. And the ship was entirely manned by sailors from Marblehead because they were notorious privateers historically. The first officer, the first military leader to die in the Revolution was from Marblehead, and his name was Jeremiah Lee. And he was a very successful businessman who turned against the British for their behavior and how they were being treated. And he died at the Battle of Concord. All right, and that was the the famous shot heard around the world, and the famous painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware. All right, all of the men rowing that boat were Marbleheaders because they were such reliable sailors and they were extremely courageous. Because that was a very, very dangerous move to make. And Washington wanted to make sure he would get there. George Washington's first, basically the head of the Secret Service, the person who was in charge of protecting him was from Marblehead. And he appointed people to serve as Washington's bodyguards to make sure he survived the revolution. We had signers of the Declaration of Independence. The famous painting of the Spirit of 76, of the man carrying the flag, the drummer, and the boy. That was painted during the centennial in 1876 and given to the town to be put in a place called Abbott Hall. And that's the original painting to it. There are copies that the artist made later, but that was the original. All right, and all of this from the Pilgrims landing, in Plymouth, to the Revolution, to the Battle of Lexington and Concord, and then all of the famous historical figures. We were taken to their houses. We couldn't go to John Hancock's house because it was torn down, but John Adams, Samuel Adams, Elbridge Gerry, James Otis. We went to Plymouth Plantation, of course, many, many, many times. Robert Treat Paine, Paul Revere's house, Crispus Attucks. We learned about him. He was the first soldier to die in the Revolution. He was from Massachusetts. And we went to their houses. We saw where they sat. We looked into their fireplaces. We touched the things that they owned. We looked into the looking glass that Jeremiah Lee looked into as he went out the door to fight at Concord, and he never came back. All of these things become very, very real, and you remember them vividly. And because you remember objects, you remember history vividly, you remember it mostly because you have the objects about you. You have the styles of furniture that they had. You had the types of artwork they had. You have the objects that they use day to day. And then once you have that interest in history and an approach to it from that side of wanting to see the things from that history, as you grow up, as I grew up and learned about European history and African history and South American and Central American history and the Incas and the Mayas and the Romans, and then on into India and the Mongols and the Muslim hordes moving into India, and China's development in Japan and all the politics there. All of those little artichokes came into view. And because I was raised to look at history through material culture and by seeing things from those eras to understand them and why they were, you then, as you're approaching new histories and new areas of human development, you approach it with the same approach that you had initially, that we had when I was a kid growing up, that you peel back the artichoke leaves and dig down and look at the objects and try to understand it. And some of them you're going to find visually very appealing and you're going to want to own them. And they serve as a constant reminder. All right. And in order to understand history, to truly understand history, I really believe that you have to be able to immerse yourself in that culture, in that period, and look at it through the eyes of the people who were there, not through the filter of modernity, but look through what people did in the period. Try as hard as you can to mentally be there, to understand why they did the things they did today that we don't think are correct. And that includes all kinds of topics: what people ate, slave issues, border disputes, how wars were fought, how governments were formed, from warlords to kings to socialists to communists to democracies, you name it. All of that, you have to understand the history and immerse yourself in it so that you don't stand back and just judge it based on not enough information. Because once you understand why a culture developed the way it did and what their history is and understand it and how it got to where it is, you have a lot gentler view of it. All right. And at other times you're going to learn things that are horrific across the board, and you won't have a very gentle view of it, but you'll understand and know why it happened. And these objects that we own and buy and collect serve as a reminder to inform us constantly about the past. And as you learn more, their meaning to you as you look at them changes. That's the wonderful part about learning about history. Your perspective changes as you learn more and as you own things and observe things that you think are worth having because they have some sort of historic or cultural meaning to someone. Material culture fills that void. And this is why when you hear people talking about going to museums and examining things, why they get so excited, because they want to see how they did things, why they owned what they owned, and so forth. And after learning what there is to know, you can certainly offer your own views, as I said. But they should be tempered by sort of a contextual understanding of the period that they came from, and not necessarily reinterpret it all through modernity, or to use history to twist or omit inconvenient historic knowledge because you really just want to emphasize a sliver of truth and then ignore the rest of it to validate some kind of belief that you have today. You need to have that constant full picture. And you only can get that constant full picture is by having material culture, by examining it, by owning it, by studying it, by going to museums, by visiting historic houses. And all of it colors it all in. Otherwise, it's just black and white. You need the color, you need the tones, you need the nuances. And you get those tones and nuances by being interested in the true history of humanity and how they got to where they are. And that brings you right back around to why people collect. Because if you find yourself collecting from different periods, it means you really are interested. If you're just an investor in objects and things like that, it doesn't mean anything. Or if your decorator told you to, you need to put an Oriental rug in your house, so that's a different thing. But if you go out and learn about the different tribes that wove rugs, or the different cultures that did paintings and what they included in their artwork, then you're really getting to the crux of it, and it makes it a lot more fun. It makes life much more interesting, and I think that it also helps keep people from going completely off the rails at times because of what's going on in the current world. And that's basically all I have to say on it. I think that collecting for me is one of the most fun things I can think of doing, and it has helped me over the years so many times to understand why people do what they do or why they don't do what they don't do, and it's a very, very important lesson for all of us, I think. All right, and those are just my thoughts. Just a quick video on this. Let me know what you do, why you collect, what's your purpose, how did you get into it? It's a fascinating area. There are lots of famous collectors around that have built up all kinds of things that have been left to museums and so forth, and it's always great fun to look at them because then you can understand how they looked at things through their eyes, and that's the great fun of it. All right, leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't so far, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.